Hi, and welcome to Experience Points by University XP. On Experience Points, we explore different ways we can learn from games. I'm your host, Dave Ang from Games-Based Learning by University XP. Find out more by going to universityxp.com. On today's episode, we'll learn from Amber Sewell. Amber Sewell is a teaching and learning librarian at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, where she works primarily with first and second year undergraduate students. Her research interests include games for instruction and outreach, pop culture, and fandom. Creator and host of the LibParlor Podcast, she is also interested in podcasting as a means of making scholarship more widely available. Amber, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to talk about games.
I am so excited to have you on the show, Amber, too, because I know that from the past Games-Based Learning Virtual Conference, you were one of the specific presenters who was named during last year's conference that we should definitely bring in for this year's conference. So
That's
I can't say
wild.
that about everyone else. Yeah, they specifically said you should invite Amber Sewell to the next conference. So based on that, I wanted to talk more about your work, specifically around your session from the last Games-Based Learning Virtual Conference.
Mhm.
And in that conference, you explored the idea of information literacy, which is very apropos because I know that you work for the library,
Uh-huh.
as more than an academic skill. Specifically, information literacy is something that shapes how we interact with the world. So can you walk us through, and you talk about this in your presentation, the ACRL framework, the
Mhm.
6 information literacy frames inspired your approach to teaching with games. So for those that are not familiar, walk us through the ACRL framework and how you've
Mhm.
applied that to using games for teaching and learning.
Yeah, definitely.
Mhm.
So information literacy is kind of this huge concept that kind of encompasses every way that humans interact with information. So, how is information created? Who gets a voice? How is information valued? Everything from how do we put scholarship and knowledge in conversation with each other and publish it? So it's kind of a big concept. And if you're not a librarian, you may not have heard the term information literacy. You may be familiar with other literacies like media literacy or
Mhm.
AI literacy, and all of these kind of fall under the umbrella of information literacy. So the ACRL framework, ACRL is the Association of College and Research Libraries.
Mhm.
The framework is really a way to break down this really huge concept into 6 approachable frames.
Mhm.
So those frames really encompass knowledge and dispositions that help us as librarians talk with other people outside of the field about this really interdisciplinary concept. So
Mhm.
things like information has value, information creation is a process, which
Mhm.
talks about like how do we choose what method to deliver information in, how do we research and disseminate this, and how do those decisions impact the way that information is received.
Mhm.
Um, so it's really big, and the framework really helps. So the way librarians often teach is we work in collaboration with disciplinary faculty.
Mhm.
And so often I will sit down and listen to their course objectives. What are they trying to achieve, either with an overall course or with a specific assignment? And then I look to the framework to see where there are intersections where my expertise as a librarian can intersect with what they're trying to accomplish with the course or assignment, and then how bringing information literacy into the discussion can deepen our understanding of a topic.
I see. And do you, to interrupt you for a moment, do you
Yeah,
also, through the framework, identify like what exactly is information? Like, is information the same as data or knowledge? Can you talk a little bit more about that?
yeah. So the interpretation of information
Hmm.
is very vague
Yeah.
in the framework because it's trying to address, it's very interdisciplinary. So information can be data sets,
Hmm.
it can be knowledge practices, it can be oral stories that have been passed down, it
Hmm.
can be um, something as simple as like, do I know how to make a family recipe that's been in the family for generations, and
Hmm.
how is that passed down and preserved? Um, so information, yeah, it's very, at least with the framework, it's left intentionally vague.
I
So
see.
we can kind of sculpt it to fit whatever our disciplinary and instructional contexts are.
I see. Okay. That's useful because I think that, um, you talk about information literacy. I was
Mhm.
asking specifically how you define it, but like you said, it could be a little bit nebulous, specifically if you're working with, faculty members who are subject matter experts in the field. And it's probably something that is best left up to how it's interpreted or I guess applied in a classroom rather than like identified like strictly within like a very strict definition in one of your frameworks.
Yeah, and I think it comes down to also like where you're positioned in the library. So
Mm-hmm.
I work with general education, which means my interpretation needs to be really flexible because I could be talking to students from any number of disciplines.
Yeah.
If you asked our science librarian, Melissa Bowles-Terry, she's going to be able to give you much more concrete examples that her discipline works with most often.
I see. Okay. Well, I mean, that's good to know because I know that, specifically working for the library, you're going to be serving all of the, like the university's faculty and all of the university students. Like you said before, if you are
Mhm.
working in a specific discipline and you have a specific librarian for that discipline, there will be, I guess different formats and structures for how you work with those faculty members, or, they may have like a specific question that comes from students on a regular basis. So it sounds like to me, and this is me coming from someone that has spent a lot of time in libraries, but does not have a background in like library science or anything else, as a
Mhm.
resource, right? And you are
Yes.
you are shaping your work to best serve the students and the faculty that you work with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, our discipline is inherently, well, there's debate about whether information literacy is a discipline that I won't go into, but it's inherently interdisciplinary, so it's very flexible and very contextual.
I see. But the second part, so I wanted to get into here with
Mhm,
your specific presentation was, you talk about information literacy, you talked about the
mhm.
framework, but how does this specifically line up with games? So during
Yeah.
your presentation, you talked about using short, adaptable games to bring information literacy concepts to life. So could you share an example of one of those games, specifically what it looks like in practice and how students tend to respond to it?
Yeah, definitely. So I mentioned that often my work involves collaborating with a faculty member to kind of leverage how my expertise with information intersects and can enhance classroom conversations.
Hmm.
And so, in that capacity, one of my roles is coordinator to a first year seminar for exploring majors.
Hmm.
And so, that class is really interested in helping students understand how their knowledge and skills that exist in the everyday life can help them be successful college students.
Hmm.
And it's also trying to help them figure out a major. And so when I met with the coordinator of that program, they were really receptive to games, but weren't sure how games would fit into their class.
Hmm.
And so the first thing I did was look at the course objectives and identified those two as overall what the course is trying to achieve.
Hmm.
And then I go to the framework and I see where out of these six frames is there something that pops out at me. And so one of the frames is authority is constructed and contextual. And
Hmm.
basically, it's the idea that information reflects the creator's expertise and credibility.
Hmm.
And depending on your information need, that authority differs. And so I really saw that fitting really well with trying to get students to see how their existing skills and knowledge translates into an academic context. And then also, when they're trying to choose a major, they're going to go to different kinds of information sources. Like they're not going to hop into a database and
Hmm.
try to search what's the best major because that's not really what scholarly research is for.
Hmm.
It's not for first year students trying to choose a major. It's for other experts in the field to
Hmm.
further research.
Hmm.
And so what I was able to do was take this frame to the coordinator and say, this is where I think things overlap.
Hmm.
And so I designed a game called Authority Argle Bargle, which
Hmm.
is Argle Bargle's like a British word for arguing sillily.
Yeah.
Um, and this game was really inspired by the fact that the final assignment for this class is students are put into teams and have to debate what is the best major.
Hmm.
So it's a tournament style debate. And I know that students, especially first year students, public speaking is really intimidating for them.
Hmm.
And one of my favorite things about games is it creates a very low stakes environment.
Hmm.
And so I wanted to give them a chance to practice that public speaking, but in a silly, very low stakes way. And then also bringing in that authority piece, like I mentioned, when you're trying to figure out what major, to choose,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to consult a bunch of different sources. And so this game was really designed to get them thinking about why they trust certain sorts of information to make big decisions. So logistics-wise, the class was split into 4 teams. They'd go 2 and 2 against each other. Teams were assigned a major, so I would consult with the instructor beforehand to choose a major that none of the students were interested in. So for instance, maybe nobody was interested in chemistry, so no team would have an advantage because students weren't going to do any research to make their arguments about the best major. I just wanted them to think about why they valued certain information sources. So teams would come up 2 at a time. They'd get the same major. I had a wheel that they would spin to see what they needed to know about the major. So how expensive is it? How many credits do they need? Do they need to go on to get more degrees afterwards? So let's say a team is chemistry, and each team needs to figure out, can they just get a bachelor's or do they need to get an advanced degree? And then each team would spin and get a random information source. So maybe one team is going to go to Wikipedia to find out if they need more degrees, and maybe one team is going to go to their advisor. And of course, some of these pairings were really great, and some of them were absolutely nonsense. They weren't going to work. And it was designed to be silly. Like, they're not doing any research. They're just trying to use their existing knowledge of why does this information source have credibility and how does that intersect?
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, can you talk a little bit more about like what was something that was particularly silly? Like you talked about Wikipedia, you talked about an advisor. What are some other things on the wheel?
Scholarly sources were one I put on there that it's never going to work. Like I said, those are articles written for other experts.
Right.
And so, like, if you got that, it was a losing argument. Or some of them were social media, which students came up with really fascinating arguments for why social media would be a good or a bad source. And so this really led to some interesting discussion, especially with social media, talking about how charisma is actually a type of authority. Like, the confidence with which somebody presents their information could be total nonsense. But we trust it, right? Depending on, like, maybe if it's a YouTube video, like, what is their background? What's the production quality? Are they citing sources even, like, real or not? And so students would feel really silly making these like grand arguments about why you should trust this person on TikTok about how much a degree costs. But it really led to some interesting conversations about like, but we do buy things just because someone we like says it was a good idea. And how does that impact all of our decision making?
I kind of have my follow-up question is, was there sort of like a meta discussion about this experience in that when students, when they spun the wheel, they went to whatever source it was, whether it's a faculty member or Wikipedia or something else, that them seeking out that source of information and then them going back to the class and then presenting that information, they are now a part of the authority on that source. Is that something that you talked about?
Yeah, 100%. Again, part of that charisma came up. Like, somebody would talk about scholarly sources and the information they were saying was all incorrect because they're first year students. Maybe they haven't used scholarly sources before, but they're being so confident in how they're presenting this really incorrect information that, like, they convince the other half of class that's voting and their team wins. And then I, as the librarian, have to come in and say, great discussion. This is a great example of how charisma and confidence works, because literally everything you just said was wrong, and let's talk about it. So yeah, often it would lead to kind of meta discussions.
Right. And what about the faculty member that you're working with? How did they interpret the results of this game for their class?
They found it really useful. It got students really excited to talk about the information sources they were consulting in new ways. That was part of the idea of the game, is to just kind of reframe how we make these decisions and who we go to. I think first year students especially sometimes feel insecure in kind of what information an instructor wants. And so often they'll default to the more scholarly, like, oh, obviously I'll go to a database to choose a major. And so this gives them the freedom to be like, actually, maybe that's not the best choice. And honestly, not a thing I would do in real life. I just thought my teacher would want me to say that. And so it gave them the freedom to kind of myth bust some of those
Yeah.
assumptions about what conversations in classrooms look like. We did a couple of iterations, and then it there were changes in the course, so this activity didn't really align with the objectives anymore, so we stopped teaching it. And the faculty were really sad about it. They had a good
Oh.
time. They really saw that students, like, it lowered their barriers to
Mhm.
engaging with each other. It made them more comfortable in the classroom and with each other.
Mhm.
So they were really positive about it.
Great. And then, based on this one particular use case, say,
Mhm.
like there's another librarian at a different university somewhere else in the country or in the world, and they get approached to use, what is it? Information. Oh no, major Argle Bargle. If they
Yeah.
wanted to approach something like that with their own faculty members,
Mhm.
like what are some lessons learned from you? Like, what did you learn throughout this process that other people could, take into account if they try to replicate your process?
Yeah, I think Authority Argle Bargle is perfect for adaptation for any major because in any discipline, you're
Hmm.
going to have information sources that you consult for different needs.
Right.
So it's a great way to kind of interrogate some of our assumptions about who we go to for information.
Mm.
Um, Being flexible and asking for feedback was one of the biggest pieces from this experiment.
Hmm.
The first iteration, students were kind of uncomfortable sometimes because I had each team elect a spokesperson. So
Hmm.
only one person would come to the front of the class and kind of make the argument for their whole team.
Hmm.
And that put a lot of pressure on those people. And so the next iteration, we developed a slide that let them map their argument out on a slide so they had something to reference. The
Hmm.
whole team came up together and each person took a bullet point. So it really made it much lower stakes. So again, asking for feedback from students, from instructors. And I also went to the final project that this was designed to support
Hmm.
to see where that alignment happened.
I
And so
see.
that was really helpful for me to be like, okay, I have what the instructors told me
Hmm.
about how this would enhance the learning, but I really got to go in and see what kind of impact this had on the final assignment.
Great. Thank you. That's really insightful. I think to summarize for the audience, keeping in mind what the goals are for the instructor, what the goals are
Hmm.
for the class, who the students are, what the overall like learning outcomes are, I think is incredibly important for one,
Yes.
building any successful learning, but two, or structure for learning, and then two, hopefully applying some games in order to meet that outcome. So, great insights. Thank you, Amber. I appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you.
Third and last question here is something I wanted to talk about before, which is the big picture. So I
Hmm.
know we brought this up during your introduction, but I know you talked about blending information literacy, pop culture, and even fandom. Plus, I know you're also a podcast host, so this is a podcast about you also being a podcast host. Do you see games and podcasting playing a role in making academic scholarship more accessible and engaging? And if so, like how do you see that happening in the future?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for this question because this is a topic I feel very passionate about.
Yeah.
I think, academic scholarship is really important. Scholars are studying things, everyday behavior, or things that impact everyday people's lives. But often that information is gate kept and isn't
Hmm.
actually reaching the communities who can use this information.
Hmm.
Either it's behind paywalls with scholarly journal and access fees, or even if people can get to it, it's written for experts by experts. It's not
Hmm.
written so that somebody with no background in the discipline can cognitively access the information and figure out how to use it.
Hmm.
And I think games and podcasting are great ways to take the scholarly information that's really important and often taken from those communities. Like we'll
Hmm.
go in and we'll study people, and then they won't get any benefit from that.
Hmm.
And so it's really a great way to make that information more accessible. I think with games, being able to put skills and information in new contexts in a way that really highlights um, how it interacts in our day-to-day life. So with
Hmm.
Authority Argle Bargle, you may not critically question why you go to one information source versus another.
Hmm.
And that game really highlights and gets you thinking about that process.
Yeah.
I'm a nerd, so I listen to a ton of podcasts that are made by academics
Hmm.
off the clock.
Hmm.
Um, and what they do really well is take scholarly information and then translate it so that everyday people can use this. And I
Hmm.
think we saw this during COVID. Science communication is really important and
Hmm.
hard job. And there were people like Dr. Raven, the science maven, who is a
Hmm.
scientist who like converted these studies being done into raps to make
Hmm.
them more accessible so people understood why the vaccine was being developed and how.
Hmm.
And so it's a really games and podcasts and these other ways of translating scholarly information for everyday audiences are just really important so that we are able to make informed decisions.
Right. Wow, thank you. I know that games, like I've talked about it and interviewed some other people as a medium is very important.
Mhm.
Also, the fact that podcasting is another form of medium. I'd say that, like, I think for our current pop culture and zeitgeist, that the quote like we should start a podcast is the current like we should start a
Yeah.
band. Like
Yeah.
before it was we
Yeah.
should start a band, but now it's we should start a podcast because one, it's very approachable, and it's
Hmm.
something that you host obviously and I host as well. But I think that to your point about like science communication and just about like academic communication, I think in
Yeah.
general is really important because if you read a lot of journal articles, it's a lot of like people in the ivory tower writing for other people in the ivory
Hmm.
tower, whereas there is a
Hmm.
huge community of other people that could benefit and are interested in this information. But I wanted to ask you, I listened to a couple science podcasts, and I want to know if you also
Yeah.
listen to them. One of them is, do you listen to Science Versus on, what was it? It was Gimlet originally, but now it's Spotify, I believe.
No, but I
Oh, okay.
am making a note of that.
Okay, that is one I've been listening to for years. The host is Wendy Zuckerman, but she talks about like, like science versus vaccines research or science versus
Mm,
like climate change. And she talks about I guess really like the pros and cons of like a particular aspect of like this topic that, people may not be having a debate about, but are, interested in doing so. And
yeah,
then the other one is I'm blanking on the name right now. I'm trying to look for it on my phone, but I cannot find it. I can't
it
I can't
always
find it.
happens.
Yeah, yeah. But it's another science podcast from NPR that I listen to.
Mm,
But I think overall the takeaway and the concept is that, there's great information out there. There's great data, there's a lot of experts, but a lot of, like we talked about before, the information literacy is one, knowing what is available, and then two, knowing how to consume it. And I guess
hmm.
three, like if you're the subject matter expert or the faculty member, knowing your audience and how to best relate that information to your students and your learners.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I, that sums it up beautifully.
I appreciate that. So we've run out of time. I wanted to throw it back to you, Amber. Again, thank you for joining us today. Appreciate it. Where can people go to find out more about you online?
Yeah, I think the best place is Blue Sky. I'm Amber Sewell 13 on
Mhm.
Blue Sky. That's where I tried to migrate from academic Twitter to academic Blue Sky.
Yep.
It's not as active yet, but that's where I post most frequently.
Hmm.
I'm also on LinkedIn.
Hmm.
Um, and then honestly, the thing I update most regularly is my CV on like the UNLV directory page.
Okay. Well, I'll make sure that I include links to all of that in the show notes. And then for those that are interested, the name of your podcast is LibParlor. So that's LibParlor. Is that correct?
Yeah, the LibParlor Podcast.
Okay. And then people can download that podcast wherever they get their podcasts usually.
Yep, in any podcatcher.
All right. Sounds good. Well, thank you, Amber. I appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much. This was great.
I hope you found this episode useful. If you'd like to learn more, then a great place to start is with my free course on gamification. You can sign up for it at universityxp.com/gamification. You can also get a full transcript of this episode, including links to references, in the description or show notes. Thanks for joining us. Again, I'm your host, Dave Eng from Games-Based Learning by University XP. On Experience Points, we explore different ways we can learn from games. So if you like this episode, please consider commenting, sharing, and subscribing. Remember, subscribing is absolutely free and ensures that you'll get the next episode of Experience Points delivered directly to you. We'd also love it if you took some time to rate the show. I live to lift others with learning, so if you found this episode useful, please consider sharing it with someone who could also benefit. Also, make sure to visit University XP online at universityxp.com. University XP is also on Twitter and Blue Sky as University XP, and on Facebook and LinkedIn as University XP. Also, feel free to email me anytime. My email address is dave@universityxp.com. Game on.